get started. We are really blessed to have Chris with us today, Chris Mathis. He is our member of the House from LD18. And, Chris is running for re-election for the Arizona House of Representatives. He is a pro-choice, pro-education, and pro-environmental leader. He was appointed to fill LD9, the old LD9. And he campaigned for that position. He is alarmed by threats to reproductive rights, voting rights, and climate change's accelerating impacts. He is one of 5 candidates seeking 2 open seats. Chris practices elder law. He is helping families resolve issues related to long-term care, public benefits, senior housing, and estate planning. A law professor at the University of Arizona and a member of the Arizona Education Association, he teaches classes on healthcare law and policy and aging. Let's have a nice Democrats of Greater Tucson welcome for Chris Mathis.
Well, thank you so much, Joe, and it's great to be back. I appreciate that introduction. And I saw there was a question on the chat about whether I'm an incumbent or not, and I think Mike answered it. I'm an appointed incumbent, not an elected incumbent, and sometimes I get called an incumbent. But I know that the other candidates in my race probably don't really consider me as much of an incumbent as some might. So I get that, and as Joe said, I thought I'd do kind of a brief introduction on top of Joe's, because I'm not sure if there are folks on the call today who haven't heard me present before. So I'll try to make it brief. So I am a state legislator. I was appointed to fill Randy Fries's seat in December. So I have been in the legislature now for a full term. It was a very full term, as I'm sure most, if not all of you know. We went all the way through June. So glad to have that experience under my belt. I will talk about that more. I am also a lawyer. I practice estate planning law and elder law, and I've done that for my entire legal career. I've also, prior to this current job as a legislator, done some legislative work. I was I guess I started out back where my wife and I are originally from, in Illinois. Started out as an intern in the Illinois General Assembly, and then also was an intern in the United States House of Representatives and a legislative assistant in the United States Senate, and also worked a bit in the British Parliament. So this has been something that I've been interested in for a long time. And it is very strange, after serving in all those staff roles, to be the member of the body and not the staffer. But it's a nice thing to be getting used to. But I still I think have kind of I still think like a staffer, and I still want to know details and procedure and all of that. So hopefully that served me well. So as far as the issues that I am running on, Joe mentioned that when I first got involved in this back in the fall, that I was alarmed by threats to reproductive rights. Well, I am way past alarmed at this point in time. As all of you know, we're in a situation where the United States Supreme Court, for the first time, I think in U.S. history, has taken away a right that we had in this country for 50 years. And it's just, even though we all watched it happen, and I think many of us feared it was coming, it's just still, to me, on a day-to-day basis, hard to get used to the fact that we're living in a post Roe versus Wade world. So, I mean, I am just kind of, trying to strategize about it, move ahead in a way that makes sense for Arizona. But I am just kind of beside myself about this, especially as a lawyer. I just can't. The fact that the United States Supreme Court has come to this and that could have come out with that decision is something that is just troubling to, I think, to all of us. I also, one of the reasons I got involved back in the fall, and we have made some progress on this issue, although we still need to make a lot more, is public education. And public education in Arizona has been chronically and I would say intentionally underfunded and starved for years and years and years and years. We did make some progress on this in the budget, which I'll talk about a little bit. We're still in a situation where we are, if not last in the country, 48th or 49th with respect to both teacher pay and just overall education funding. So that is something that I would like to continue in the legislature, continue to fight on. We, of course, also have this situation where now, in addition to that part of it, the Republicans, and I think this passed on every Republican in the House voted for this, we've expanded ESA's private school vouchers to the point where every student essentially in Arizona can have one of these things. And it is all of that money that goes to those vouchers is each dollar is a dollar that is coming out, is being siphoned off of the public school budget from our tax dollars. And we had a referendum on this. We had an initiative in 2018, whether we in Arizona wanted to do this, and there was a resounding answer to that question, no. And I think the percentage, I think that the vote on that initiative was some 60-some% who were against it. And if you look at the polling on this, that is still basically where we are. Yet this past session, the Republicans kind of really at the last minute introduced the bill. Ben Toma, who probably will be speaker next year, introduced that bill, and it passed on a party line vote. So we still have plenty of work to do, not just to fully fund public education, even beyond that, where we need to really claw back the dollars that are going to ESAs and also STOs, also the other tax mechanisms that we have in the state to give public dollars to private schools. So that is definitely something that I want to work on further. And the more you know about it, the more troubling it gets, frankly. Also, another issue that is like this, and of course, there are a number that are like this, and one of the reasons I got involved in the race in the first place, and something that has just gotten worse since the fall, at least what we know about it, is the situation with our water in Arizona. As I'm sure all of you feel, that we need to do everything that we can to preserve our precious water resources. It is an alarming situation. The levels on Lake Mead and Lake Powell, all kinds of things that are happening largely as a result of climate change. And it is an existential issue for Arizona, and really one that shouldn't be a partisan issue. Make some progress on that in the budget, which I'll talk about a little bit later. I also ran and am still running to protect voting rights. This is another one that kind of really a precursor, I think, to the Dobbs decision, was the Supreme Court decision that happened, I guess about not quite 10 years ago, but I think in 2013, the Shelby County versus Holder decision. And this was a Supreme Court decision where then a majority, and this is a majority without the Trump appointees, decided that the Voting Rights Act needed to be reworked, and that it was kind of unfair that all of these states that had voting sort of basically targeted Black and brown voters in the past, that the Supreme Court felt that the formula should be changed to determine which states are sort of on that list as far as the pre-clearance list. Arizona is one of those states. And what the Supreme Court did in that case is they basically gutted Section 5, which was the part of the Voting Rights Act that has all the teeth in it and that allows for states to and others to question voting procedures before elections, not after elections. And so that, I think, was a precursor to decisions like this Dobbs decision on abortion rights, where it was just a legislation that we had in this country for 50 plus years that had worked incredibly well to keep voting fair and protect our voting rights was gutted. So that is something that because of that federal protection was gutted, now in the states we've had this onslaught of bills to try to make it harder to vote, and that really is what's going on. They're trying to make it harder to vote, and they're trying to make it harder to vote because they think if they make it harder to vote, that will help Republicans. And it's fairly straightforward. There's a lot of more, complicated jargon that goes with it, but that's essentially what's going on there. So I continue to be quite alarmed by that. And we had actually some victories this year in the legislature, stopping the worst of those bills, but some also got through. One of them was so bad, I think the governor even vetoed it, which is saying something. The fifth issue that I just wanted to touch base on that I'm running on has to do with gun safety. And we need to pass common sense gun safety laws in the state of Arizona. This is something that has been, just on a personal level, one of the most, I guess, difficult issues for me to work on. And I think largely that still goes back to what happened here in Tucson in 2011. And meeting with the Moms Demand Action folks and hearing their stories is a very very moving and difficult thing to do, and it really shows you the real costs of this bizarre situation that we have in the United States, where speaking of the Supreme Court, where somehow Second Amendment rights have been allowed to trump our public safety interest, I think, in so many cases. And it's a troubling thing. We still have the ability, though, in the legislature and perhaps through initiative to change that. And that's something that we still need to, that we definitely need to be working on. Of course, we've seen in the past couple of months all of the horrible ramifications of our current system, and it's just it has to change. And we have to keep talking about it, because I fear that what happens is we have these awful situations, these awful shootings. It becomes a part of the national discussion for a while, and then it fades. And that's part of the trick, and it's been part of the trick in this job, is there are, so many issues that require our full attention and our top priority, and we need to stay focused on them. And it is, but there's only so much time in the day. And so it is a constant challenge, and that was one of the most frustrating parts, I think, of being in the legislature, is so many of these bad bills get thrown at you, and you have really a very limited amount of time to try to bat them away, and to try to find Republicans who aren't fully supportive of the bad bills. And fortunately, there are, in each case, there are some, and it's really just a question of whether you can get them to vote in a way that is consistent with the private discussion that you might have with them. Right now, we're in a situation, largely because when the Redistricting Commission drew their lines in 2011, we were still a pre-clearance state. The Voting Rights Act was still fully in effect. So the maps that we have in place now, not the new ones, but the ones we have in place now, had to pass pre-clearance, and largely as a result of that, and I'm a little biased on this, but in very good work that was done on the commission, we were able to get maps that truly reflect the balance of of voters in the state of Arizona. And right now in the legislature, we have a situation where there's a 1-seat majority in each house. There's a 1-seat majority in that the Republicans have in the House of Representatives, and there's a 1-seat majority in the Senate. So really all we need to do from a math perspective, if we can pick off one Republican, we can block these bad bills. And we've been successful on doing it in a number of cases, but we're not always successful, and they get through. And unfortunately now we have a governor who will sign those bad bills, which is why it's so important, no matter what happens in the legislative races, that we elect a Democrat as governor. Because I mean, what a difference it would make for us if we knew that even if some of these things get through, they would be vetoed. Because even though the new maps, I think, will probably lose at least 1 seat in each house, we'll see. The Republicans still won't have a veto-proof majority. It's just there's no way. Even if you're trying to draw maps that favor Republicans, there's just no way, because of the balance of voters in the state, that you can draw those maps. Fortunately, so we do have that ability, if we have a Democratic governor, to have bills vetoed and stay vetoed and not be overridden by the legislature. So it's a really key point. And, there's just so many reasons why we need to have a Democratic governor elected in the state of Arizona. It would help us so much in the legislature. Really just a whole different ball game. And of course, not just in the legislature, but elsewhere. So, so that is a kind of initial discussion of some of my background and some of the issues that I sought the appointment over, and then I'm also running on now. I thought what I would do, and I know this is a little bit smaller group, so I'd like it to be conversational, but I thought maybe I'd talk a little bit about some of the stuff that I touched on, kind of my impressions of the legislature being there now for a full term. I wasn't sure what to expect. I had formed an impression based on a number of different, based on kind of what I've read, who I talked to. I formed a very negative impression of what it would be like to interact with the current crop of Republicans in the legislature. I knew that these jobs that all of us have, whether we're Democrats, Republicans, there aren't any independents, but if we'd be independents, our job is, at the end of the day, even though we all have strong partisan views, the job is not a partisan job. The constitutional role is to represent the district and to try to do the best job of finding ways to pass laws and do other things that will benefit folks in our district. So that's the job. So on the one hand, that's the job, that's the system that we have, that's the brilliant system that we have. Yet you have this hyper-partisanship in the legislature, and that tends to be what you hear about most of the time. So that was kind of, I guess, my question is, how do you sort of do both of those things at the same time? How do you try to work with the folks there, but also, stick to your views and try to advocate strongly for your views? And what I found was it was way more. It was a way more pleasant work environment than I thought it would be. I was pleasantly surprised by the fact that there are, and again, if you go down the issues, there are just certain issues that we are not going to agree on in the different caucuses. We've talked about some abortion, guns, voting rights. There are stark differences on those issues at this point in time. So having discussion on those issues probably isn't going to get you anywhere. But the good news that I found was that most of the legislation that passes in the legislature, and I had no idea about this, even as somebody who's watched it fairly closely, I would say it's 75% of the bills, maybe a little bit more than that. Most of the bills that pass either pass unanimously or with strong bipartisan majorities. And that was surprising to me. And I think one of the reasons that was surprising to me is because of the coverage of what happens there. And also because the impact of the bad bills is so intense that it's easy to focus on them, and we need to focus on them. But one of the things that I noticed is, and I watched this happen on the floor, is the coverage that we get in the Arizona Daily Star is mostly, and I'm so glad the Arizona Daily Star is there and features the coverage. The coverage that they feature is usually coverage written by a guy, Howard Fisher, who has a news service that he's been doing for a number of years, and he's very skilled writer and reporter. His approach is that he will try to find, and he's syndicated in a number of papers in the state who don't have a dedicated bureau in Phoenix. His approach is to find sort of what I would characterize as the craziest, most offensive Republican bill of the day. And as all of you know, there's like a the old straw dispensers at McDonald's where you take out a straw, another straw pops up, you take out a straw, another. Well, that is the way it is with the crazy offensive Republican bills. I mean, you will never sort of exhaust them. They just keep coming from folks like Kathy Herod and from ALEC and all of these groups that feed the Republicans their bills. So there's a steady diet of them, and there's always some Republican member who is willing to run these bills. So what Howie Fisher will do is he will find that bill, go up to the Republican member, get some sort of to us quote that sounds offensive and crazy, and then he will maybe go to Reggie Bolding or Jen Longden on our side and get their quote, maybe talk to a stakeholder, and that's the article. And so that's what you get. So usually the article that's either on the front page or the article that's on the front page of the Tucson section will be the Howie article featuring the bad, the sort of bad, scary bill of the day. Those articles aren't false, they're true, and all of that stuff is going on. The frustration is that you don't have, in addition to that article, maybe 4 or 5 other articles about other things that are happening at the legislature that are more that get outside of the polarized issues and that are more just the things that legislatures have done forever, improving processes, reviewing agencies, situations that we all have, where just in discussions like this, you're talking with somebody, they bring up an issue, whether it's a current law that isn't working or whether there's a situation that might benefit from a new law to improve things. The legislator has that discussion, takes it to legislative council drafts a bill, and then you run that bill. And so there are many, there are many good things that happen that don't get covered. But it is also true that the bad things are still happening. So I think this is one of the difficulties in talking about this, because I don't mean to say that because there are sort of things are a bit more functional than we thought, and because these regular things aren't happening, that the bad things aren't happening, because they definitely are, and they're definitely things that we need to be alarmed about across the issue set. But it's not, I guess, quite as bad as I thought from the perspective of dysfunction, and also from the perspective of just collegiality, because I literally didn't know. And again, as I said, I had the legislative background, and so I know what it was like when I was doing that stuff. At this point in time, it's 20 years ago since I worked in Washington, but I had a sense of it. And I knew that members, at least back then, used to be cordial, and you try to get to know each other as people and sort of see what you could do if there were areas you could work together on. The good news is that does still happen. And I think that also as members of the minority party, there is no other way for us to proceed than to try to, on the issues that we are able to engage on, to try to form those relationships, because it is all about, and it's going to be like this, I think, unfortunately, at least for a couple more election cycles under these new maps, it is all about blocking bad bills, and it's all about trying to get, if possible, a couple Republican supporters for our good bills. And if you can do that, then you can get the bills will be run through committee, the bills will come to the floor, and you can get them passed. And we've had members who had success in getting Democratic bills passed. But in order for that to happen, they have to, the committee chairman, all the chairmen are Republicans, has to have a hearing on the bill, and among other things, and the bill has to then be brought up on the floor by the speaker or by the president of the Senate. So that is really the environment that we're in. And so I think it is beneficial to have, I know it is beneficial to have members who get that. And while they are fighting every day for our democratic priorities, are also every day trying to find ways to partner with whoever it is to get good things done for our districts. And so it's a balance, but I guess I was pleasantly surprised that there is more functionality than I would have thought. I think one of the reasons that we had the functionality that we had this year, culminating in a bipartisan budget for the first time since Shannon Napolitano was governor, is because Rusty Bowers was the speaker. And if we were to look in Rusty's thought bubble and go down the issue set on this call, we likely would not agree with him on that many issues. But he is somebody who at least, you saw what he did in the January 6th committee, hopefully. And also he's somebody who, I didn't agree with us, at least I think he had respect for Reggie Bolding and for Jen Longden and for the leadership on our side, and allowed us to be in a situation where we could get a bipartisan budget passed, where we got a number of great democratic priorities in the budget. Of course, it is also true that there are a number of Republican priorities in the budget, so it's a mixed bag. But it was a big deal that we had a seat at the table and that we were able to get that done. Of course, one of the reasons we were able to get that done, no matter who the speaker was, is because I was just reading something in the new, Phoenix Axios this morning about the new Arizona Freedom Caucus. And these are the folks who are to the farthest right in the Republican caucus. And the Republican caucus is, to my eye, extremely far to the right to begin with. So these folks are the people who are like to the right side of that. And there are, I don't know, it depends on how you count, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of them. And the deal was the Republicans passed budget with only Republican votes, because there are certain Republicans that just, with a surplus situation that we had, where you had this over $5 billion surplus, just would not support, were not inclined to support any new spending on anything that, in my view, could benefit the state. They just kind of wanted to do tax cuts or do nothing at all. In any case, because of that dynamic, we were able to have a seat at the table and get a lot of good democratic priorities included in the bipartisan budget. So that was sort of a good end to the session, and that was my impression. The other main impression that I had, which was fantastic, and hopefully something that influenced the way that things went, and the fact that we got a bipartisan budget, was I was one of 6 Democratic appointees to the House, recent appointees. And so there were a number of us, I think, who were appointed in November, and each one of those folks I found to be just a really good person, but also very hardworking and very effective, each in their own way. So, and I think that what I was told have been told, what I think many of us have been told, the new folks, is that having that group of 6 come in together, and there were 3 Republicans who were also appointed, each really hyper conservative, but there were folks that we got to know a little bit, and just having that group of new people apparently changed the dynamic a bit and made things somewhat less contentious than they had been. That's what we were told. So, so that's my wrap up. I see it's question time. I appreciate you listening to that long introduction.
Okay, well, let's start off with a couple of questions. What committees would you like to be appointed to?
The committees that I'm currently on, the committees I was appointed to when I was appointed, were the Judiciary Committee and the NRU Committee, which is Natural Resources, Energy, and Water. And they've both been very educational, and I've enjoyed being on both of them. There's a lot of ifs, but if I advance next week, and then if everything goes okay in November, we'll see what the situation is and what the leadership's interested in doing. I would definitely like to stay on NRU. We were able to, that was one of for me, the high points of the legislative session is we were able to, with our Democratic folks on NRU, along with the Republican leadership, negotiate what wound up being, in my view, a much, much, much better version of the water bill than what was introduced by the governor, whenever it was in February or March, the governor and the Republicans. What they came to us with was a bill that, this was, I think, referenced earlier, a bill that was it's $1 billion for augmentation, water augmentation, which the big project that they're interested in doing is desalination. We would partner with Mexico to do desalination from the Sea of Cortez. And then there are other ideas about a pipeline from the Midwest and yet other ones. That was kind of the bill that we got. It was a desalination bill, and everybody who would be on the board that would make decisions with respect to this new entity they wanted to set up would be appointed by the governor. So it's $1 billion for desalination, no conservation money, and the governor gets to appoint everybody. And so that was, as you might imagine, not acceptable. We did have some bipartisan dialogue on this, and one of the things that I kept saying, and one of the things that I knew from my experience as an observer of the Independent Redistricting Commission, was the makeup of these boards and these commissions is determinative. So if you've got a board that is completely appointed by the governor, completely appointed in this case by one party, you're going to have an outcome that reflects that. Fortunately, we were able to, we had leverage, and we were able to get a situation that's much better, not just not just the governor not appointing everybody, but we're able to get members of our minority caucus able to have picks that are going to be on this board, and the key thing other than that is we were able to get $200 million at least for conservation put into this augmentation bill. And even though many of us would have been a conservation bill, maybe with an augmentation component, what we got was an augmentation bill with a conservation component, but still it was a significant component. And I got to be a part of negotiating that because of my role on the NRU committee. So I definitely like to stay on that committee, something that we didn't deal with. One of the many issues, that are out there in that committee that we didn't deal with, particularly having to do with water, was the groundwater issue. And that is, of course, one of the major things that needs to occur. And I'm hoping that next session, if we can build on some of the momentum that we had from the negotiations on this aspect of it, that we'll be able to make progress on that. So I'd love to stay on that. Judiciary, we'll see. I have a healthcare background, done a lot of healthcare policy work, was a healthcare legislator in the United States Senate, have a master in public health degree, teach healthcare law at the U of A. So I would, if possible, I would like to be on the healthcare committee. And I think that's a natural fit. So we'll see if that happens. But that's a long answer to your question. But those are the two I am currently on and the one I'd be interested in being.
Okay, and that question was from Christina Early. Christina, thank you. Steve Early, you have a question.
Hi, Chris, and thank you for being with us again. My
Hey, Steve.
question is something that we haven't talked about, and that is, y'all, the crazies passed the bill money for the wall, and how do the crazies plan on building a wall on federal land?
Well, beats me, Steve. It's just, I talked about all of the kind of bipartisan negotiations that we were having in the budget there towards the end, and something that kept popping up was this funding, and they just, it is just something that they are, obsessed with. And it's sort of like as you say, federal land, federal law versus state law, just doesn't really factor into it. It's just something that I think it's something from a political standpoint that they feel like their base voters need to see in any legislation that they pass. And so that's why it keeps coming up. I don't know, I'm sure a number of you, all of you probably have been seeing the Republican political ads, and they all feature, there's kind of this scene where whoever the candidate is, they put some blue jeans on and they maybe find, like a sheriff or some law enforcement person, and they kind of walk along the wall. And it's just become this, archetype for a Republican ad. But I don't know. It makes no sense. It is, at the end of the day, immigration is a federal issue, and but they keep doing it anyway. They keep funding it anyway. So yes, I think the interesting thing will be to see what now that there is, how does that money get used? I think to your point, now that it's out there, and is it usable? And I don't know, but I'm sorry that it was. That they figured out a way to pass it. And I think, as I recall, they sort of separated that out as the way that they did it. And that's how they were able to get through. But good question. I wish I had a better answer. I guess we'll find out.
Okay, well, George Beverly Jr. is here with us today. We met him at the last Drinking Democratically. So it's really, really good to see you. You have a question for Chris?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Joe. Mr. Chris, I really appreciate your campaign points. They're really awesome. I'm new to Arizona, so I'm trying to get understanding of the politics going on in Arizona. My deal is access, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as you know, when it comes to those type of things, you're talking about just the Democrats trying to get a majority so we can work out stuff. If you look at the Black and brown people that are within this city or this state, they're really unrepresented. So a couple questions is, one, what are we doing for the indigenous people as far as their education, to get them quality education and services? And how do they work with the state superintendent? And also you also said that you were into health and stuff like that. So the other question would be is what can you do for teachers for mental health and everything that they have to go through and see, and actually work with the children? Are they getting, can we find a way to get them mental health extension in their insurance? And then the final question is the homeless population. I lived in Oregon, I lived in the mountains, and we had a huge population of homeless children. So what are we doing for the children that are homeless? And is there a way to support them in getting quality education and also technologically access if they don't have it?
Geez, thank you very much for all those questions, George. They're all excellent questions. I don't know that I'll be able to go into the level of detail that the questions require, but from a as far as education for our Native American population, that is something that, as I was talking earlier about our bipartisan budget, we were able to get, I think, all kinds of really, hopefully, at least in people's lives, transformational things included in that. I'm just looking at my bullet points here from the budget. There's $4 million for Navajo Technical University Environmental Testing Lab, $8 million for DNA College Student Center, $16 million for adult ed programs, including, I think it includes all populations, but also Native American populations. And there's a $5 million non-lapsing money for the Office of Indian Education. So really there were a number of great wins. And I think that was because of our caucus's focus on it, and specifically because of the Navajo members in our caucus who focused on it in addition to others. So from that perspective, I think we've made progress. I don't know that answered your specific question, but that at least is some progress. I think on the I completely agree as far as the mental health dollars for teachers. I don't know, and I'd like to be able to get you a better answer to this, to what extent it's possible to leverage or utilize some of the new funding that we were able to get for those specific services. And it sounds like it's a couple of different things. It might be trying to kind of expanding benefit packages to get mental health coverage for teachers, and maybe also could include having some in-house, an ability to get in-house counseling on that kind of thing. It's an interesting question. I wish I had a better answer. Somebody who I talk to on these issues a lot, who probably knows the answer, is Jen Pollock, who's a great member from the Phoenix area. And she really has been our point person on education issues in the Democratic caucus. She will be facing, by the way, I don't think she has an opponent in the primary, but her district is going to be competitive in November. And to the extent that people are interested in who would be good to support no matter what happens on August 2nd, Jen is somebody who is just a key asset to our caucus and to the state. On homelessness, we were also able to get $60 million put into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which is a huge, historically, that's a huge amount. That's just the funding piece of it. I know it doesn't get to the full issue, but at least from our what we were able to do in the legislature, we were able to make some progress on that. And that is one actually that has played out, I think, as a at least to some degree, as a bipartisan issue, because I think it's something that that folks, no matter what the makeup of people's district, it's something that people have exhibited a concern about, and I've been heartened to see that. It's definitely something. Just traveling to the Capitol in Phoenix, there's a large homeless population right on the mall there outside of the Capitol. So it's a tough one, and I appreciate you bringing it up. We've made some progress, but we need to make more. Thank you for all those questions, George. Great
interaction. Appreciate it. Mike Bryan has a question.
There's a couple in the chat that I wanted to shoot your way.
Oh, great.
So Rod Norris first asked, what are the first two pieces of legislation you hope to author or sponsor in the 2023 session? Can you describe those, and do you have any plans?
I introduced 7 bills this time around. I think two that I know I will reintroduce are the first is something something that I've done a lot of work in, at least in a residential sense, and here in Tucson, has to do with historic preservation. I introduced a bill to so that there would be a tax credit available for commercial historic preservation projects in the state, both in throughout the state, Tucson, Southern Arizona, primarily what I'm interested in, but also elsewhere. I think that is. I just have an interest in saving old properties. I think there is also an aspect of that when you do that, you help revitalize neighborhoods, and there's an economic benefit to that. And I think the trade-off is worth it. So I would like to see that, and that's something I'll be continuing to advocate for. The other one gets to my work as a elder lawyer and an estate planning lawyer, and that is a bill to put some rules in place for the way that we handle the right to die in Arizona, and so that people who are terminally ill would be able to make a decision with all the appropriate guardrails and safeguards to end their lives. And that's something that, especially if I'm able to have more of a role in healthcare legislation on the healthcare committee, that I'd like to advocate for. And it's just something that I've seen in my own practice quite a bit. It would be nice to have a better rule set around. So I think there's so many out there and so many issues to tackle, but those are two. Thanks for that question.
You bet. Steve Mizell is wondering, do you favor seriously pursuing desalinization as a strong part of solving our long-term water issue?
Well, as I said earlier, from my perspective, a lot of the augmentation discussion was kind of a hey, look over there kind of a thing to take our attention away from of course, the big elephant in the room with water in Arizona is agriculture use, and that's something that we need to work through. And that's also something I think on NRU that we might be able to do it. If the desalination technology is really interesting, and there's just a story on NPR the other day about the island of Catalina, the city of Avalon, off of California. They use desalinization. I think Santa Monica has been doing some of it. Israel's another example. So the technology is really interesting. The issue, of course, is the cost. And it is just extraordinarily expensive. And so the good news is that you might be able to have some sort of constant, more or less constant supply, augmented supply. But the thing that I've never understood is how exactly that would all play out economically when it's just per gallon extraordinarily expensive. And of course that's just when you get through the process. That doesn't include somehow bringing it up to Arizona. So no, I mean, I think what will happen with this new legislation is that this new WIFA, the Water Infrastructure Financing Authority, has been significantly strengthened to pursue this stuff, and certainly extraordinarily well funded. And so they will be able to take a look at it and try to enter in any contracts necessary to pursue this. Whether or not it will pan out, I don't know. It wouldn't be, as I said earlier, it's not the bill that I would have written. I just have very serious questions about the economic viability of desalinization. But frankly, I think it's worth looking at, and I hope that we're able to find some way to make it economically viable as part of the solution. But really, from my perspective, we need to be focusing on ag use and conservation.
Thank you. One final question before I turn it over to Barbara, who's had her hand up for a while, is Rod Norris wants to know if you will pledge to be or are planning to be an active author on the op-ed pages in Arizona media to build support for the Democratic legislative agenda. So I guess he just wants to know that you're going to speak out on issues. Will you pledge to do that?
Yes, I did. I did have, I had an op-ed in at some point, I think in May, on education funding. And I'm really glad that the Daily Star has been doing that. And yes, definitely.
Okay, Barbara.
Hi, Chris. As
Hi,
you
Barbara.
know, it's been extremely hot here, unbearably hot, more than ever. And fortunately, we got a little rain yesterday, but it's going to go on like this. Understanding that the Corporation Commission has a lot to do with addressing our changing climate, I'd like to know what you can do from two perspectives. One, in terms of addressing climate change itself, what sorts of things could you do in the state legislature? And secondly, from your position on the health committee, how can you address climate adaptation for extreme heat? For example, for three different kinds of scenarios. One, we have a lot of people who live outdoors and they need help. Two, we have a lot of people who work outdoors and are constantly exposed to extreme heat. And three, we're all at risk if we have a major power outage. And I don't see a really robust plan for how to deal with these issues other than there's some cooling centers around town. What could you do at the state legislature to help prevent major disaster from extreme heat events for each of these types of groups?
Well, thank you, Barbara. So I'm very proud that I'm a Sierra Club endorsed to date. So I've enjoyed interacting with Sandy Barr and with the incredible resources that Sierra and our other great environmental groups have on this issue. With respect to climate change, one of the I think something that we need to be focused on is ways that we can use this latest pot of money that was passed, the 200 million plus, for conservation to work on trying to find ways to plant more drought-resistant landscaping, and as I mentioned earlier, trying to figure out how to recharge our groundwater. I think another important part of that is watershed protection, and that's something that, as far as from a climate perspective, that we can try to do with the pot of money for watershed restoration and rehabilitation. As far as the extreme heat, I know Andres Cano has been a very effective advocate for legislation that would offer worker protections for extreme heat that we have. I mean, you know, it's not just being out canvassing the past couple months. You get a sense, you know, even with all of the abilities that we have to, you know, take some time off or get into an air-conditioned car, it is very punishing, and many of our folks don't have any choice there. So I think that any legislation that we can pass to offer protections for workers in extreme heat is something we need to do. I know that Andres has said, and I know this is the fact, that unfortunately the Republicans have been blocking this for the past number of sessions. So I think that is the legislative solution to that, or at least that's legislative help to that. And Barbara, I'm trying to remember the last of the three topics that you mentioned.
Well, what about people who live outdoors? How do we deal with them, and homeless people and so forth? And then thirdly, what about all of us in case of major power outage? What can we do to address that, protect ourselves from that, and so forth?
So yeah, well, I think there was, we dealt with on the NRU committee this session legislation that people had different views on, and our caucus had different views on. It's a question of how quickly it made sense to deregulate our utilities, and there were different views on it. I think that one of the things that one of the reasons that I voted the way that I did on that was because of the concern about what you mentioned, and that is you know, the grid crashing, especially when it's most likely to happen. It's a time of extreme heat. This just happened, I think, again, or a version of this in Texas. I believe it was at the beginning of last week. And so I think that, and as you say, the Corporation Commission is involved in this as well. But from a legislative perspective, I think that we need to be building on the legislation that was passed with respect to deregulation, whatever one's position was on that, that we need to make sure that the new system that we put in place for determining what power sources will be utilized in the state need to have an eye on what you mentioned, which is a potential grid failure. And I think we're seeing in Europe right now some of the results of what can happen when you don't. Unfortunately, most of us probably have air conditioning or access to air conditioning. And in Portugal and Spain and England and France, we're seeing what happens when that isn't the case and you have extreme heat and people die. That's the thought. I guess to me, it has to do with it's a regulatory issue. There's a piece of it that's legislative. There's a piece of it that's a Corporation Commission.
How about the homeless people?
Well, I think, as I had said earlier a little bit, at least we did make some progress with a fairly significant $60 million contribution in this bipartisan budget for affordable housing. And I think the notion there is to try to use the resources that we have to get people out of that situation. We need to do more, and it is one of the most difficult situations that we have right now. And as I was saying earlier, it's literally something that in just going to the legislature every day that you're faced with in Phoenix. So we need to do more. We've made a significant contribution to that fund, but we need to do more. I'm happy to do anything that will help with that, and I'd be supportive of any measure that would be legislative that could be effective.
Great questions, Barbara. Let's wrap up today. And our president, Larry Bodine, sends his regards. He's under the weather, and let's all wish him that he gets feeling better soon. The second thing is we got this election coming up. Are you all excited about this election? Are you all fired up? Are you ready to go? Well, let's do it. Let's have a great one. Chris, thanks for being with us and having such thoughtful answers to thoughtful questions. Have a great week.
Thank you, everybody.